Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today. We had a good meeting last night, and today we're another good meeting, good round of speakers. What they asked me to talk about today was this impact of globalization in the United States and what are cooperatives doing to deal with this issue. And so if you think about it, I've done some quick email surveys with a number of CEOs I know of U.S. cooperatives. One of the things, we have a huge domestic market in the United States, so we have not looked very export marketed in many of our markets. We've got 315 consumers, 300 million whom claim Irish heritage, and so we have a big market, and we've also got a big market north and south of us in terms of Canada and Mexico. So I'm going to talk about some examples of what U.S. cooperatives are doing. But again, keep in context, we have a huge market that we work with, as some of the previous speakers talked about. You know, we have farm policy, and our farm policy mimics a lot of what's going on in the European Union. So in 1996, we said we're going to embark on this 15-year gradual phase out of agricultural subsidies and change things. And some farmers and some cooperatives believed what the government was saying, and they started strategies in the late 1990s to get ready for this day. And other co-ops and other directors said, well, we'll just worry about that when it comes. You know, you can never tell with politicians what they actually say is going to happen. You can never predict what's going to happen in the future. And so some cooperatives got started dealing with globalization early, and some didn't. We do a number of surveys with directors and CEOs and senior leaders of cooperatives every couple of years in the United States, and we've got pretty good participation rates. And global competition was never cited in those previous surveys until 2011. In 2011, the first time we started hearing co-op leaders talking about global competition as something to worry about. So the previous speaker talked a lot about the opportunities of globalization. I believe there's lots of opportunities. Like everything, though, there's a risk-reward trade-off. So you can't have more opportunities without more risk. And that risk is the volatility. In many ways, you're going to look exchange rate risk, black swan type events. If you know, no one's crystal ball probably saw what was going to happen with the Russian embargo. You know, one of the speakers, I think it was Bertie, talked about Arla Foods here this morning. I mean, Arla identified that as a black swan event last year as one of the 5 key strategic risks for their cooperative. And so they also said, you know, how would you mitigate that risk? Well, you buy a plant in Russia, or you do something different to handle that. But as a co-op director, those opportunities, if you're going to compete globally and you want more opportunities, the big decision you've got control over as a director is how much equity is on the balance sheet. And so as you think about what does all this mean for you as a director, one of the things we find in the United States, which I think is also true for cooperatives around the world, your decisions as directors, so if you want to give the farmer more money, for example, on the milk price or the beef price or the vegetable price or whatever it is, that's less money that goes on the equity part of the balance sheet of the cooperative. And so your decisions, you do impact the strategic decisions of your cooperative in terms of how you view the equity. You're the ones who decide what that balance sheet looks like. And if you want to compete globally, if you want to be in these value-added markets, you've got to think about your balance sheet much differently, because the balance sheet's the only thing you've got that's a shock absorber to deal with the volatility in the world markets. It's the one thing you can control as a cooperative for your producer members to handle that risk, is to think about your balance sheet. So what are U.S. cooperatives doing? So I did a number of things here getting ready for this presentation. The slide's a little busy, but we have cooperatives that try to control the entire process. So and I'll give some examples of these. They want to control the entire process of marketing, production, the volumes, etc., sold internationally. We have some cooperatives that actually bought into assets overseas. So Chile's been if you think about north-south hemispheric things, there's 7 or 8 valleys around the world that are very good for agriculture. The Central Valley in Chile down there has had a lot of U.S. investment in it for managing these off-year type products. We've got people now in Canada, for example, that are members of cooperatives. So historically, if you're a U.S. farmer, you didn't have international farmers part of your cooperative. We've now got 4 U.S. cooperatives that allowed Canadian farmers to join their cooperative in the United States. And we've discovered the antitrust exemptions transferred to those individuals. So we've had some court rulings that have said you can be a Canadian farmer, for example, be part of a U.S. cooperative, and the antitrust exemptions stick with the cooperative. So that's been a very positive thing for the sector. We've got oranges being grown in South Africa. They're based on California navel oranges that are being sold in the Middle East that are owned by farmers in California. I don't know if any of you all know what a hazelnut is? Have you followed hazelnut prices this year? They're skyrocketing. We had a frost in Turkey, and all of a sudden we've got a large volume of hazelnuts run by a U.S. cooperative in Oregon. They've almost seen the price double here in the last 3 months. And so now we've got, what do farmers do? They plant more hazelnuts, right? So, not thinking that there might not be a frost next year in Turkey. Licensing, Sunkist, we've seen a number of cooperatives really ramp up their licensing. Sunkist Foods has got the largest licensing program of any food company in the world, and it's a cooperative owned by 900 citrus farmers in California and Arizona. And they've got more than $50 million a year that just falls into their pockets because of their licensing programs. And we've seen other cooperatives trying to ramp up their licensing programs and work with these retail packaged good companies to do some joint branding. Lots of joint ventures. The previous speaker talked about Cargill. I mean, Cargill, if you look at the number of joint ventures they've got with cooperatives, it's a lot. And there's a lot of collaboration between Cargill and cooperatives that's beneficial to both, or they wouldn't be in those joint ventures. We've seen a number of things, Land O'Lakes, Welsh Foods in Japan. We're seeing Dairy America formed by U.S. cooperatives to look at marketing some milk powder internationally together. And we've got some other things. It's amazing when you see, as I'll talk about on a later slide, the DFA Board of Directors, which is our largest dairy cooperative, they've had a number of visits from other cooperatives around the world, some joint board activities in the last year, which is very interesting when you start looking at what, why do directors go see other directors in other parts of the world. So what does competition mean for us globally? A lot of it is ingredient markets. So we do branded products overseas, but our cooperatives are heavily involved in the ingredient market, which is quite lucrative for if you can produce something for another food supplier, provide a solution, as we talked about last night with someone. We've seen a number of cooperatives building innovation centers. So historically, boards of directors are very reluctant to invest in large amounts of research and development. And if they did in cooperation with other co-ops. So the dairy industry, for example, they cooperate with each other to build research and development among multiple cooperatives. We're now seeing these innovation centers being set up in apples, almonds, citrus, to provide more solutions to other type of buyers. And that's money that farmers are investing in through their duties as boards of directors in these centers. And obviously that impacts the price. They've got less money to pay the producers for these crops, but they're making these investments. And we also do a number of things where we just sell things as it is when it leaves the farm. So we've still got a number of specialty crops, almonds, dried fruit, other nuts, grains, and oilseeds, where there's very little value added being done. But what's the co-op providing? They're providing large volumes, and they're also getting expertise in logistics, handling, packaging, and volume. If you look, most of the U.S. cooperatives are involved in these, globally, in this type of activity here, sold in similar form. The value they bring is, there is value in a farmer cooperative. The trust factor seems to be much higher when you talk to these CEOs, and the fact that the farmer tends to be thinking more patiently about how they deal with things. Dairy sector is starting to become alive in the United States, a little bit on export markets. Again, a lot of that's exchange rate driven. If you follow the US dollar, it's certainly not very favorable right now for some of these exports. We've had a number of companies come to the United States to set up operations. We have not seen a lot of our expansion overseas until recent years. California, to a lesser extent, Idaho and New Mexico, dairymen think differently. They're much more wired toward export markets with their cooperatives in other parts of the United States. So I'm going to go real quickly through a couple of things here, just with some data put together from talking to some CEOs. Blue Diamond almonds, they've got almost 80% of the world almond industry is controlled by U.S. farmers in California. Sunsweet prunes, dried plums. People don't think of the prune industry as being, they think of it more as an age-sensitive issue. But really, it's become, I don't know if you're familiar with the glycemic index, but prunes right now have much less added sugar than cranberries or raisins. And if you think about these trail mix packages, we've now got the technology that the cooperative owns to take a prune and remove all the pit. Historically, the problem with the pit removal was we left parts of the pit in there. The cooperative now has patented the technology to do this, and you're going to see more prunes showing up in trail mixes cut in small pieces, because they've got less sugar, better on the glycemic index, and they've got more energy than a raisin or other dried fruit. And so I think in the next 5 years, you'll start seeing more and more prunes showing up in trail mix type things because that's what consumers want. Treetop apple juice, ocean spray cranberries, navel oranges, I talked about them. Welsh Foods, again, with their grapes. They control a large supply of the world's Concord grapes, which are the best for being used in juices. Hazelnut growers. Sun-Maid Raisin in California was just designated as one of the world's most iconic brands. They put together a list of 100 iconic food brands, and a number of co-op food brands were on that list, and Sun-Maid was the top-rated one. A number of speakers talked about the beef industry. Historically, as we talked about last night, beef slaughtering co-ops have not done very well worldwide. So when I study co-ops all over the world, you don't find beef slaughter co-ops really surviving over long periods of time. And there's a number of reasons for that which we won't go into, but what we're seeing in the United States right now is the forming of these networks. So we saw this in pigs in the late 1990s, over a 5-year period, producers with common genetics, common veterinary practices, and so forth, pooling their resources and forming these informal networks to market their products. We're now starting to see that happen in the beef industry. So Angus is the only breed that most consumers understand, and so an Angus cow is something with one black eye, or 51% black hide, so it's a very loose definition of what Angus is, but that has some value if you have large volume loads of Angus cattle that a supermarket wants to label as that they've got black Angus. And so we're now seeing black Angus hamburgers and so forth. When I was at the Plowing Championships last month, I saw you've still got a number of these exotic breeds, and most consumers don't recognize those exotic breeds. All they know is Angus is good, and there's a lot of cultural reasons why they think that way. CHS, our large farm supply cooperative, is now the second biggest cooperative in the world. They've doubled the number of employees. In fact, the hardest thing they've got is trying to find talent. They've gone from 5,000 to 10,000 employees. And they've got investments now all over the world. The board of directors is struggling, trying to keep up with the pace of change in that organization. Land O'Lakes, one of our large dairy cooperatives, is now active in China. It's interesting, they're using technology as opposed to trying to sell product. So they're trying to take U.S. technology from their dairy farmers and trying to start dairy farmers and milk sheds over there and licensing, if you will, U.S. technology in terms of dairy production. We face competition. So if you look very carefully, China is probably our biggest competitor right now in many of our export markets, global markets. You don't see vegetable on there. Bertie talked about the fact there's no vegetable co-ops in Ireland. We had a large vegetable co-op in the United States called Bird's Eye Foods, and they had a very charismatic CEO who leveraged the co-op up, and the strategy didn't work, and the farmers were forced to sell their co-op. So we really don't have co-ops in the vegetable industry either in the United States, but we are heavily involved in fruits and canned fruits. But we're dealing with a whole bunch of things right now, especially with global imports coming from China. So to conclude here, kind of what else are we seeing? From a co-op director standpoint, we're seeing co-op boards travel more than I've ever seen in my lifetime. Brazil and China have been the most common destination for boards of directors to go to. Argentina is becoming more popular. This year I'm taking a group of, I've got a leadership academy I teach through the university for individuals that want to be CEOs of cooperatives. And I've taken 20 of those people in that executive program to Argentina in January to look at some things down there. We've seen a lot more board chairmen coming up and showing up on education programs in the United States. So we've got 5 or 6 regional education programs for directors like this, and virtually all the planning committees are saying we want to hear from directors from around the world on these programs. So if any of you have got a passport that allows you to travel to the United States, please let me know, and we'll see about trying to get you on one of these programs and pay your travel and so forth. The governance systems are changing rapidly too. So as you think about efficient decision making, which we've talked about this morning, you know, the biggest thing we deal with in cooperatives around the world is confidentiality. It's just hard to keep a big group of people to keep their mouth shut. And people say it's a cultural thing with cooperatives, and I say, you know, you can't have that, because every time information is leaked from the boardroom, you're devaluing your cooperative. And the courts have said very clearly in the United States, if a director consciously leaks information that lowers the value of the cooperative, the insurance indemnification does not carry to that director. So if you've got proof on this, that director could be sued if the cooperative was selling or involved in a merger. And so smaller board, we're seeing more people saying, you know, we need a smaller board of directors We still need involvement, so you've got things like what you call your representative bodies or advisory boards who have influence, but the number of individuals that are really involved in the monthly day-to-day decision-making dealing with the key strategic issues is becoming much smaller as a board of directors as ways of dealing with all these governance challenges that cooperatives have around the world. We're also seeing more diversity. So as cooperatives get larger in size in the United States, the people are saying, look, okay, you want to be a big co-op? Fine. Then you've got to start abiding by some of the rules that require of other governance things. So certain countries in the world require a certain number of women on the board of directors. We're seeing big challenges right now among our cooperatives in the United States saying, look, if you're going to compete globally, you've got to abide by these diversity challenges and trying to find ways to put the right people on the board who understand audit committees and so forth. You can still have a farmer-controlled board of directors, but you've got to think about, if you're going to deal globally, how do you deal now as a director dealing with audits that are being done in different languages, different auditing practices, and trying to consolidate that into one standard balance sheet. So those are things we're really making a big deal of trying to, you want to compete globally, you've got to make sure your governance challenges and your expertise in the boardroom are to help protect the cooperative. Last slide here, I think the big things, or the big concerns that co-op leaders have told me. The drought in California. I know that may not mean much to you, but California is a big exporting state. We've had 3 years of no water, and it looks like the 4th year will be the same thing. We've thinned out the orchards, we've reduced the cattle herds out there for dairy and so forth, but we've still got a number of issues with dealing with California, and that's our big agricultural state. Regulations, I guess you don't have any regulations over here, but we've got them in the United States. Immigration's our big one, trying to find labor. CO2, sustainability, we talked a bit about this last night. I really see an opportunity for cooperatives to help carry out the sustainability claims that these supply chains that are competing against each other want. Chinese imports, antitrust issues. Our current president was brought in power in 2008. I think he's done overall an okay job. But he had some very strong antitrust issues that he wanted to deal with, and cooperatives have been targeted by this a little bit. Transferring wealth across generations. We're dealing with that issue right now. How do you transfer wealth? And can you transfer co-op equity across generations to allow future generations to benefit from the investments their parents have made in the cooperatives? We talked about the organizational structure. Probably a big thing on the dairy side is geographic indications. So 10 years ago, we saw very few of these geographic indications in the European Union. You've now got over 6,000. I think Ireland's got 3 that are all cheeses right now that are labeled as linked to this terroir concept or something unique in the thing. We're very worried about this from a trade perspective because we produce feta cheese too. We produce Munster cheese. We produce blue cheese, etc. And so we're very worried about the investments we've made in labeling on those and what might happen out of these trade agreements. So, but overall, most of our cooperatives are still going to stay focused on our domestic market. So we're going to look globally, but still we've got a big domestic market to deal with, and we're going to take questions, I guess, later. So, Bertie, I'll stop there, and we can go from there.
Okay.